Good afternoon, Wheaton College Community Church. Thank you for your genuine care and concern for the millions of Venezuelans struggling to survive in either their own country or by fleeing to a neighboring country in an effort to find safety, stability, and resources. We will start by grounding our approach to the Venezuelan crisis in Scripture. We will then touch upon the history and political tensions behind the crisis, as well as highlight a few countries, especially Colombia, that have opened their borders to Venezuelans. We will then share the story of a young Venezuelan family impacted by the crisis and highlight ways you can tangibly assist and advocate for the good of all Venezuelans, both now and in the years to come. James 1:27 states, "Religion that our God accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." What is so incredible about this scripture is that it points us toward an action-oriented love for God and love for our neighbor. While the Venezuelan crisis is a departure from the orphans and widows specifically mentioned in this verse, it is not a departure from the Venezuelan people. The orphans and widows mentioned in James 1:21 are both literal and symbolic figures. What we believe God is saying in this verse is, look after the most vulnerable populations in the world, both locally and internationally. With that in mind, let's consider the history and politics that led to the Venezuelan crisis. On March 5, 2013, Venezuelan's longtime president, Hugo Chavez, died of cancer at the age of 58. During his tenure as Venezuelan's president, Chavez was an admired leader largely due to his social welfare programs. As president, Chavez sought to nationalize Venezuelan's oil industry and used the profit to fund food subsidies, education, and healthcare programs. Chavez's policies, unfortunately, damaged Venezuelan's oil industry due to lack of investment, corruption, and cash shortages. In 2013, upon President Chavez's death, Nicolas Maduro won the presidential election by a narrow margin. Upon taking office, Maduro engaged in largely unrestrained spending, creating a huge deficit that sent the country of Venezuela into an economic spiral. In 2014, Venezuelan central bank announced that the country had entered a recession. At this time, President Maduro cut government-subsidized programs, leaving Venezuelans, especially poor Venezuelans, without access to food and health care. In 2015, upon threat from opposition leaders, Maduro quickly acted to secure Supreme Court justices that would be loyal to him in an attempt to protect his power and position for years to come. In 2016, Venezuelans began protesting and calling for the removal of President Maduro, claiming that he was responsible for Venezuelans' economic crisis. In 2017, President Maduro held a vote to impose a new governing body in Venezuela called the National Constituent Assembly. This body would have the power to rewrite the constitution and would replace the only opposition party in Venezuela, known as the National Assembly. This attracted criticism from several international actors. In 2018, rapid inflation, escalating political turmoil, and starvation continued to rise among the Venezuelan people. On the political front, President Maduro's re-election was met with claims of fraud. The people of Venezuela wanted change and were feeling desperate. By this time, over 3 million Venezuelans had been forced to flee due to a lack of food and medicine. Finally, in 2019, tens of thousands of Venezuelans began to protest Maduro's re-election, calling for his removal from office. Most Western governments refused to recognize the legitimacy of Maduro's re-election as well. During this time, opposition leader Juan Guaido also began claiming presidential power over Venezuela, citing emergency powers per the Venezuelan constitution. Guaido quickly gained the support of the United States, and in response to this, Maduro cut diplomatic ties with the U.S. and removed all U.S. diplomats from Venezuela. Maduro also blocked all U.S. aid from entering the country. As you can imagine, living in such political turmoil and resource scarcity has resulted in millions of Venezuelans being forced to flee in order to survive. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees summarized this Venezuelan exodus by stating, "The people of Venezuela are fleeing to, quote, escape violence, insecurity, and threats, as well as lack of food, medicine, and other essential services." While a majority of Venezuelan people have chosen to remain in their country despite the increasing challenges, for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the approximate 4 million Venezuelans that have been forced to flee the country. As you can see from this graph, Colombia has welcomed the largest wave of Venezuelans to date. In 2018, that number reached approximately 870,100 men, women, children, teachers, farmers, nurses, and grandparents, to name a few. Today, the estimated total has climbed to over 1 million Venezuelans. Notably, Colombia shares a porous 1,300-mile border with Venezuela, and it is believed that approximately 37,000 Venezuelans cross its 8 official migration posts per day. Some of those people will continue on to other countries. A report by the New York Times described the Venezuelan exodus in vivid detail, stating, "Rolling suitcases behind them, some walk along highways, their salaries so obliterated by Venezuela's hyperinflation that bus tickets are out of reach. Others try to hitchhike for thousands of miles until they reach Ecuador or Peru. But no matter their destination, the vast majority come through treacherous roads in Colombia. A 125-mile journey over a 12,000-foot pass in the Andes Mountains. Desperation is the driving force behind so many Venezuelans fleeing their homeland. Here is the story of one such family. Meet Andre, an 8-year-old boy from Venezuela. He is pictured on the left. In June of 2019, Andre's parents realized that life in Venezuela was too dangerous and fled the country. At that point, Andre's family of 7 walked from Venezuela to Colombia. They arrived in Cucuta, Colombia with very little. Upon arriving in Cucuta, a Colombian family took them in and divided their already small home in half for the 2 families to cohabitate. Now, 15 people share a single toilet and roughly 400 square feet. Their roof is made of tin, wood, and tarps and is also pictured. With regard to the assistance Andre's family is receiving in Colombia, thankfully they have gotten connected to a local church and Compassion International. Together, these 2 ministries are providing meal kits, helping with job placement, providing tutors for the children, connected the family to a social worker that will assist with their living situation, and ensured the family has access to medical care. As we near the closing of our presentation, we want to highlight a few ways you can advocate on behalf of Venezuelan families like Andre's. We also want to touch upon how you can connect with Venezuelans living in your own community. To spark advocacy and action, we want you to pray, speak up, and give. Please join us in praying for the following: safety, strength, and resources for all Venezuelans en route to other countries and for their resettlement. This includes Venezuelans both internationally and locally, some living in your own neighborhood, as well as safety, strength, and resources for all Venezuelans that have chosen to remain in their First, write, call, or email your state's representatives and urge them to 1. Increase humanitarian aid to countries currently hosting displaced Venezuelans, and 2. Increase the total number of refugees the United States is willing to accept in 2020. If you do not know your state's representatives, simply call area code 202-224-3121 and the operator will provide you with that information. Use social media to share updates and information published by trusted sources. Speak up when leaders and news outlets mention the Venezuelan crisis and show that both Americans and Christians are concerned about what is happening in Venezuela. Lastly, please consider giving financially to any number of trusted sources providing on-the-ground assistance to Venezuelans both within their country and among the neighboring countries hosting the displaced. In closing, thank you very much for your time. This officially concludes our presentation, and we will now open it up for questions.